During my Harvard Law graduation, my husband called me a failure. When my father took the stage at the charity Gala, he announced, "Catherine earned a full scholarship while her husband told everyone she was worthless." I watched Nathan's face go white. The ballroom froze. 500 of Manhattan's elite stopped mid-conversation. Champagne flutes suspended halfway to lips as my father's words echoed through the Harrison Foundation charity Gala. Nathan's grip on my wrist tightened so hard I knew there would be bruises by morning, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and something that looked like pure terror. I sat at table 17, the one shoved against the service corridor where Nathan always positioned me at these events, far enough from the action that I couldn't embarrass him with my supposed inadequacies, close enough to the kitchen that servers constantly brush past with their clattering trays. But now every eye in that ballroom had found me. My father wasn't supposed to be here. Nathan had specifically instructed security that Daniel Foster was banned from the guest list, yet there stood my dad at the microphone, holding an envelope that would destroy 7 years of carefully constructed lies, wearing his simple gray suit that probably cost less than Nathan's tie. "Before you celebrate the Harrison family's achievements," my father announced to New York's power brokers, "let me tell you about Catherine Foster. Yes, Foster, not Harrison. The woman who earned a full scholarship to Harvard Law School while her husband told everyone she was too stupid to succeed." Nathan's Yale roommate, Derek Blake, dropped his wine glass. The crystal shattered against marble, burgundy liquid spreading like spilled secrets across the pristine floor. Patricia Harrison, Nathan's mother, rose from the head table with the imperial fury of someone whose perfect evening was being destroyed by truth. What Nathan didn't know was that Catherine Foster wasn't the failure he'd spent 7 years creating. I was a Harvard Law graduate with a 3.97 GPA, summa cum laude, law review editor. I had job offers from 3 top Manhattan firms worth $350,000 starting salary. My father had just sold Foster Industries for $57 million, making me the sole heir to a technology empire Nathan had dismissed as Daniel's little hobby business. More importantly, I'd been documenting everything. 7 years of psychological abuse, financial control, and systematic humiliation, all meticulously recorded in encrypted files Nathan would never think to check. Every cruel comment at dinner parties, every public dismissal, every time he'd made me account for spending grocery money while he lost thousands on failed investments. But in this moment, watching Nathan's carefully constructed world crumble, I felt the cold strategic clarity that had gotten me through law school in secret. This wasn't just exposure. This was the opening move in a game Nathan didn't even know we were playing. The morning had started typically enough in our Brooklyn Heights brownstone. I'd prepared Nathan's breakfast with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned that deviation meant conflict. Egg whites with truffle oil, whole grain toast cut diagonally, orange juice with exactly 3 ice cubes. The routine never varied. Nathan's sticky note on the counter read, "Don't embarrass me tonight. Remember your place." He monitored everything in my life with forensic attention. Bank statements, credit card charges, even the mileage on my 10-year-old Honda. What he hadn't thought to check was the storage unit I rented under my maiden name, where I kept my Harvard textbooks and the laptop I'd bought with cash, saved from skipping lunches for 8 months. At the medical billing office where I worked, my colleague Maria had slid half her sandwich across the break room table without comment. She knew about Nathan's Sunday night financial audits, where I had to account for every penny while he drank scotch that cost more than my weekly salary. "The gala's tonight?" Maria asked quietly, recognizing the defeated look I wore before these events. The Harrison Foundation Charity Gala was Nathan's favorite stage. 500 of New York's elite gathering to celebrate philanthropy, while Nathan displayed his greatest charity case, me. Proof of his generous nature, the nobody he'd rescued from community college and was slowly civilizing. What made it worse was that everyone participated. Nathan's mother, Patricia, would be there with her backhanded compliments about my appropriate dress choices. His sister Margaret would whisper to her friends while glancing at my secondhand gown. His Yale brotherhood would laugh at his stories about my supposed failures, his adorable project who just couldn't quite grasp their sophisticated world. But that afternoon, everything changed when I overheard Nathan on a conference call in his study. "Make sure security has the updated list," he said, voice carrying through our thin walls. "Daniel Foster is explicitly excluded. I don't need Catherine's father making some scene about his little tech company. The man doesn't understand proper society." My needle paused mid-stitch as I mended my dress hem. My father had sold Foster Industries 3 months ago for $57 million. Nathan didn't know. I'd been very careful that Nathan didn't know, just like he didn't know about Harvard, about the scholarship, about the late-night study sessions in a 24-hour diner where I memorized constitutional law while he slept peacefully in our bed. The ride to the Hamptons estate was typical Nathan torture. He drove his BMW while lecturing me on appropriate conversation topics. "Don't mention your job. If anyone asks, you're between positions. Don't discuss politics. You don't understand the nuances. And please, Catherine, try not to look so desperate when you smile." I stared out the window, counting down months. 6 more until our 7th anniversary, when the prenup's most restrictive clauses would expire. 6 more months of this carefully constructed hell. The Hampton estate glowed with old money, every surface designed to remind guests of their place in Manhattan's hierarchy. Nathan immediately abandoned me at the entrance, joining his Yale friends at the bar while I found my assigned seat at table 17. Always table 17. Always by the service door. Always alone except for whatever elderly donor needed a place to rest between courses. I'd been sitting there watching Nathan perform his success when the impossible happened. My father walked onto that stage. Now, as security moved toward him and Nathan's grip threatened to break my wrist, I felt something shift. Not breaking. I'd broken long ago when I realized who I'd married. This was different. This was the cold, analytical hardening I'd learned in contract law, the moment when you realize your opponent has revealed their entire strategy. "Security, remove this man immediately," Nathan shouted, but his voice cracked on the last word. The commanding tone he used in our kitchen suddenly sounded weak against my father's quiet authority. My father held up his hand, stopping the advancing guards. "I have documents that everyone in this room needs to see, legal documents that expose 7 years of fraud." Judge Elizabeth Brennan rose from table 12. I recognized her from news articles, Manhattan Family Court known for her zero-tolerance policy toward financial abuse in marriages. What was she doing here? "Let him speak," she said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "I've reviewed his evidence. This concerns criminal conduct." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Nathan's business partners began pulling out phones, probably checking their own exposure to whatever was unfolding. Derek Blake had gone completely white, backing toward the exit. My father opened the envelope. 7 years ago, Nathan Harrison married my daughter, Catherine Foster. What he didn't tell anyone was that Catherine had already been accepted to Harvard Law School with a full merit scholarship. Patricia Harrison's gasp carried across the room. Nathan's champagne flute slipped from his hand, crystal exploding against marble, the sound punctuating my father's revelation like an exclamation point. Instead of celebrating her achievement, my father continued, Nathan convinced her to defer enrollment. He needed a wife who wouldn't threaten his ego, someone he could control and diminish. So he created an elaborate fiction. I felt Nathan's grip on my wrist loosen as understanding dawned on faces throughout the ballroom. Everything they thought they knew was being systematically dismantled. Catherine didn't drop out of college because she was failing, my father said, holding up transcripts. She graduated summa cum laude from NYU before Nathan convinced her she wasn't smart enough for graduate school. She didn't struggle with simple concepts. She was already working toward her law degree, while Nathan told everyone she could barely balance a checkbook. Derek Blake's wife actually covered her mouth in shock. I saw her remember every joke she'd laughed at, every cruel comment she'd endorsed about Nathan's charity case wife. Judge Brennan stepped forward. Mr. Foster has evidence of systematic psychological abuse designed to prevent his daughter from achieving her potential. More importantly, he has evidence of financial crimes. That's when Nathan made his fatal mistake. "This is ridiculous," he snarled. "Catherine is nothing without me. I gave her everything, a home, social position, purpose. Without me, she's just another nobody with delusions of grandeur." The words hung in the air like a confession. 500 witnesses to his contempt, his need to diminish me, his pathological inability to see me as anything more than a prop in his perfect life. Judge Brennan pulled out a tablet. "Mr. Harrison, I have recordings of you discussing your wife's supposed inadequacies with friends and colleagues. I also have financial records showing you've systematically prevented her from accessing marital assets while hiding significant debts." She began reading from the screen. Quote, "Catherine is genetic trash who was never meant for our world. The prenup ensures she gets nothing, and she's too broken down to realize I've been planning her disposal for months." The ballroom erupted, not in whispers this time, but in genuine shock. Even Nathan's most loyal friends were backing away, their faces showing disgust rather than amusement. I never," Nathan stammered, but Judge Brennan wasn't finished. "You told your attorney last week, and I quote, 'Move the timeline up. If Catherine discovers the offshore accounts or the debts I've hidden, we need everything transferred before she can file for divorce. She's too stupid to understand complex financial structures anyway." Margaret Harrison shot up from her seat. "This is entrapment. You can't prove—" "I can prove everything," Judge Brennan interrupted calmly, "including your family's knowledge of and participation in financial fraud designed to hide assets from Mrs. Foster." She turned to address the crowd. "Nathan Harrison has lost approximately $3.2 million in failed investments over the past 18 months, money borrowed against properties he doesn't fully own, using fraudulent financial declarations to secure loans." The whispers turned to calculation. I saw Nathan's business partners pulling out phones, probably checking their own exposure to his schemes. Investment deals they'd participated in, loans they'd co-signed, partnerships that might now be compromised. "More significantly," Judge Brennan continued, "he's been systematically transferring marital assets to offshore accounts in preparation for abandoning his wife with nothing but debt." Nathan's face had gone from white to gray. "You can't prove any of this without illegally obtained evidence." "Everything was obtained legally," my father said, stepping back to the microphone. "Catherine has been documenting your abuse for 3 years, Nathan. Every cruel comment, every public humiliation, every financial manipulation. She recorded it all." I felt every eye in the ballroom turn to me. Catherine Foster, the supposed failure, sitting at table 17 with evidence that could destroy one of Manhattan's prominent families. Judge Brennan approached my table. "Mrs. Foster, would you like to share what you've discovered about your husband's activities?" I stood up from table 17 on legs that felt surprisingly steady. The secondhand black dress I'd worn to every Harrison event suddenly felt different. Not shabby, but elegant in its simplicity. Honest in a way Nathan's world could never be. "Nathan has been telling people I failed out of community college," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "The truth is, I graduated from Harvard Law School 2 weeks ago, summa cum laude, first in my class." Derek Blake actually stumbled backward. Patricia Harrison gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. The lies they'd built their superiority on were crumbling in real time. "While Nathan was telling everyone I was too stupid to understand cryptocurrency," I continued, I was studying corporate law and forensic accounting. While he mocked my inability to grasp complex financial concepts, I was tracking exactly where our money was going. I pulled out my phone, opening the documentation app I'd used to build my case. 3 years of recorded conversations, photographed documents, and financial analysis that would make his accountant weep. Nathan lunged toward me, desperation replacing calculation. "Catherine, we can discuss this privately. You're embarrassing both of us." "The only thing that embarrasses me," I said calmly, "is that I let it go on this long." Judge Brennan stepped between us. "Mr. Harrison, I should inform you that based on evidence provided by your wife and her father, I've issued a restraining order preventing you from accessing any joint accounts or properties until this matter is resolved in court." Nathan's face went from gray to green. "You can't do this. That money is mine. The house is mine. Everything is mine." "Actually," my father interjected, "the house is mortgaged beyond its value using fraudulent income declarations. The cars are leased with falsified credit applications. And the investment accounts you've been draining? Those loans are about to be called in." The room erupted in chaos. Nathan's business partners were having urgent conversations, probably calculating their distance from the scandal. His Yale friends had mysteriously discovered they needed to leave early. Even the servers were watching from doorways, having witnessed years of Nathan's cruelty and finally seeing justice served. Patricia Harrison rose from the head table with imperial fury. "This is ridiculous. We are the Harrison family. We don't tolerate extortion from social climbers." Judge Brennan turned her tablet toward Patricia. "Mrs. Harrison, I have recordings of you discussing your son's financial crimes and your family's plans to help him hide assets from his wife. Would you like me to play them for everyone?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Nathan isn't the only one who's been recorded," I said, finding strength in truth I'd hidden for too long. "Every family dinner where you planned my humiliation, every party where you orchestrated my exile to table 17, every conversation where you discussed how to break me down, it's all documented." Margaret Harrison made one final desperate play. "She's lying. Catherine was always unstable, jealous of our success." "Margaret," Judge Brennan interrupted, "you're also featured in these recordings, specifically discussing ways to make Catherine feel worthless so she'd never leave Nathan. That's conspiracy to commit psychological abuse." The legal terminology landed like bombs in the rarefied air of the charity gala. These people understood lawsuits, understood reputation damage, understood that their perfect world was about to be exposed in very public court proceedings. Nathan stood isolated in the middle of the ballroom, his careful superiority crumbling. The Yale friends who'd laughed at his jokes about my stupidity were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The business partners who'd enabled his fraud were calculating their own liability. Even the society matrons who'd participated in my humiliation were backing away from the toxic fallout. 7 years, I said, my voice carrying over the chaos. 7 years of being told I was nothing, that I should be grateful for scraps from your table. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit the narrow space you allowed me to occupy. I looked directly at Nathan, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Without his audience, without his enablers, without the armor of inherited privilege, he looked exactly like what he was, a mediocre man whose only talent was making others feel small. "The prenup you've been using to control me. Judge Brennan says it's void due to fraud. The debts you've been hiding, they're your responsibility alone. The assets you've been transferring, they're frozen pending investigation." Nathan's face had gone beyond pale to something approaching translucent. "Catherine, please. We can work this out privately. I'll give you whatever you want." "What I want," I said, pulling off the modest wedding ring he'd complained about for 7 years, "is to never see you again." I set the ring on the table and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before me, but this time it felt like respect rather than pity. At the ballroom doors, I turned back one final time. Nathan had collapsed into a chair at the abandoned head table, surrounded by empty seats where his supporters had been just minutes before. Patricia and Margaret huddled with their lawyers, probably calculating damage control. The perfect Harrison family image was lying in ruins, like Nathan's shattered champagne glass. 6 months later, I stood in the corner office of Foster Legal Associates, looking out at Manhattan from the 32nd floor. My father had used part of the $57 million from selling his company to establish a law firm specializing in financial abuse cases. I was the managing partner. The Harrison divorce had made headlines for weeks. Nathan's fraud investigation had expanded into a federal case involving tax evasion and investor fraud. He'd lost the brownstone, the cars, even his membership at the Yale Club. Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in Queens, living in a studio apartment, his reputation destroyed beyond redemption. Patricia and Margaret faced their own legal troubles. The conspiracy charges had been dropped in exchange for testimony against Nathan, but their social standing never recovered. The Harrison Foundation folded after major donors fled the scandal. Maria worked as my paralegal now, her salary triple what she'd made at the medical billing company. We'd hired 3 other women who'd escaped financially abusive marriages, building something real from the ashes of Nathan's lies. The foundation was Maria's idea. Table 17 Legal Aid, helping women who'd been pushed to the margins fight their way back to the center. Our first scholarship recipient was a woman whose husband had hidden her acceptance letter to medical school for 8 years. Sometimes I thought about that charity Gala, the moment my father took the stage and spoke my real name. Catherine Foster, not the diminished version Nathan had created. The moment 7 years of lies crumbled into truth. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying Nathan. It was becoming everything he'd told me I could never be, while he became exactly what he'd always been beneath the privilege. Nothing at all.